When you build a house, you have absolute control over what goes inside it. You pick the furniture, you set the thermostat, you basically decide who gets a key and who doesn't. It's a completely curated environment.
Right, yeah. It acts as a sanctuary. I mean, people who build it know every single square inch, and they dictate the entire culture within those walls.
Exactly. But then, the front door opens. And the moment a child walks out that door, all of that architectural control just vanishes.
It's totally gone.
Right. Suddenly you are not the architect of their world anymore. You're just standing on the porch, hoping the foundation you spent years pouring actually holds up under weather conditions you literally can't control.
That realization, honestly, is easily one of the most jarring psychological transitions for any parent or guardian.
Oh, absolutely.
You go from managing their reality to merely, influencing it, and often from a pretty considerable distance.
Which is the exact tension we're exploring today.
Welcome to Today Ayeneh podcast.
Today, we're looking at a really universal anxiety. What actually happens to our kids the moment they step out into the real world?
It's such a massive topic.
It really is. And our sources today come from a highly illuminating panel discussion featuring 3 clinical and developmental psychologists, Dr. Payman Rofi, Dr. Nicole Jafari, and Dr. Fujin Zain.
Right, and the mission today is to extract their practical, really science-backed advice on human development from that panel.
Exactly. We're going to figure out how to spot early warning signs, how to foster genuine communication without driving young adults into hiding, and really how to guide teenagers through highly risky situations without resorting to heavy-handed restrictions.
And I should say, even for those listening right now who don't have children, the mechanics what we're unpacking today are highly relevant to you too.
Yeah, totally. It's not just a parenting thing.
Not at all. The psychological insights here regarding human development, why communication breaks down, how people navigate social dynamics, they apply directly to how we understand our own upbringing.
Right.
These are the exact same principles you'd use when, say, mentoring a junior employee, managing a team, or just trying to improve communication in your everyday relationships.
This is so true. So if the ultimate goal is helping them navigate the outside world, we first have to look at where their time and attention are actually going.
Yeah, the math of it all.
Right. The sources point out that a child's sphere of influence doesn't just slowly expand. It shifts dramatically, almost overnight.
Yeah, the developmental psychologists on the panel highlight this really major statistical inversion. Basically, before elementary school, children spend roughly 2/3 of their time deeply embedded in the family environment.
2/3, that's huge.
It is. Their entire world consists of parents, grandparents, maybe, aunts and uncles, and they learn basic conflict resolution in this very insulated bubble.
Right, like learning how to argue over a toy or how to apologize.
Exactly. Usually just by playing and wrestling with their siblings or cousins.
But then, kindergarten or first grade hits, and that math completely flips. Suddenly, 2/3 of their waking life is spent exposed to outside factors.
Total inversion.
We're talking about peers, teachers, and really complex schoolyard dynamics. It's literally like moving from a walled garden into a massive public park.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Because in the walled garden, you know every plant and every rock. But in the public park, you have no idea what's buried in the sandbox or who's hanging around the swings.
Right. And to understand why that public park becomes so all-consuming for them, we have to look at the psychology behind it. The panel references Erikson's theory of psychosocial development,
which is essentially a framework that maps out how our social and emotional needs evolve at different stages, right?
Spot on. So according to Erikson, when kids hit middle childhood, their driving psychological need shifts away from just seeking parental approval.
Oh, wow. So they stop caring what we think.
Well, it's not that they stop caring, but they enter a stage focused on industry and competence. Finding a tribe, fitting in with friends, and gaining the approval of outside authority figures like teachers, that actually becomes the core mission of their development.
Which naturally leads to a fascinating cultural divide the sources plug up, regarding how different societies actually handle that scary transition into the public park.
Yeah, the cultural contrast is really interesting here.
Western cultures seem to really push kids toward outside friendships very early on. It's almost viewed as a metric of success if your kid has a wide circle of friends from school.
And the sources note a gender dynamic there too, actually.
Oh, right. Western boys often seek out one single best friend to confide in, while girls tend to form larger, interconnected friend groups.
Yeah. But in Eastern and Middle Eastern cultures, the sources note a really heavy reliance on keeping socialization within the extended family.
Basically avoiding the public park altogether.
Exactly. The structural difference between individualist and collectivist societies plays a massive role there.
Right.
Western societies highly value independence and branching out, but Eastern and Middle Eastern cultures often lean on the extended village, using cousins and relatives to fulfill that essential peer interaction. They really prefer to keep the social circle closed.
And I can easily see the logic behind the collectivist approach. I mean, if you're terrified of what's lurking in the public park, you just keep them in the walled garden with their cousins. It feels like a way safer bet.
It does feel safer. But the sources throw a pretty heavy data point at that assumption.
Yeah, they do.
They show that relying exclusively on the family circle doesn't actually guarantee safety.
Right. The data tells a pretty uncomfortable story there.
It really does. Keeping children exclusively within a family network does not insulate them from harm. Statistically, exposure to early drug use, severe dysfunction, or even instances of sexual abuse very often originate from known relatives or close family friends.
So the walled garden has its own blind spots.
Big time. But beyond just physical safety, the psychologists emphasize a real developmental necessity. Kids literally need outside friendships to build what they call a scale.
A scale, like for measuring behavior, like figuring out what a normal friendship is actually supposed to feel like.
That is exactly the underlying mechanism, a scale to weigh what is healthy versus what is toxic.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because think about it, if a child only ever interacts with their cousin, and that cousin happens to be highly manipulative or cruel, the child might internalize that this is just how all relationships work.
Oh, wow. Yeah. They mistake loyalty for like an obligation to endure mistreatment.
Exactly, because they have absolutely no outside data. But by interacting with strangers in the public park, they gather contrasting data points.
Right. They experience different personalities.
Yeah. They learn how to set boundaries with people they aren't related to. And they slowly calibrate an internal compass for what a healthy dynamic actually looks like.
You know, if you're listening to this and driving to work right now, think about how that applies to adulthood.
Oh, it totally does.
People who only ever work at one highly toxic company often think screaming bosses are just the industry standard.
Yes.
They don't realize it's a toxic environment until they switch jobs and finally get a new data point.
Exactly. It's the exact same principle.
So, if we accept that our kids have to go out and build this scale in the public park, the obvious problem becomes, how do we know when the scale breaks?
Right. How do we know they're in trouble?
How do we know when they've stepped on a landmine if we aren't even there to watch it happen?
Well, that requires parents to adopt an entirely different mindset. The panel suggests becoming a parenting scientist.
A parenting scientist. I like that.
Yeah, because a scientist operates on observation and baselines.
Yeah.
You have to know your subject's baseline behavior so thoroughly that any significant deviation immediately registers as an anomaly worth investigating.
And the sources break this down by age, which makes sense, because the baselines obviously change.
They change drastically.
Right. So with elementary-aged children, the cause and effect is still pretty linear. If a young kid comes home from school, stomps through the door angry, marches straight to their room, and refuses to talk.
And you know they aren't fighting off a stomach bug or something.
Right, exactly. Then it doesn't take a PhD to deduce that something specific happened at school. It's usually a bad grade, a humiliating comment from a teacher, or just a fight with a friend on the playground.
Yeah, the inputs and outputs are relatively straightforward at that age. But when they hit the teenage years, roughly 12 to 18, biology completely takes over the steering wheel and the baseline shifts dramatically.
Oh man, if you're a parent of a teenager listening right now, you probably know this shift intimately.
Oh, I'm sure they do.
The sources point out that a teenager's physical sleep patterns naturally shift. Their circadian rhythms alter, making them want to stay up late into the night and sleep until noon.
Which is totally normal.
Right. And they naturally become more private, maybe a bit moody, spending more time isolated in their room. As a parent, you see that, and your immediate instinct might be to panic and assume those are warning signs.
And distinguishing between normal biological development and actual behavioral warning signs is honestly the hardest part of the scientist's job.
It's so tricky.
Because gradual shifts in moodiness or sleep are standard. The warning alarm should only sound when you see sudden drastic behavioral pivots.
So it's the velocity of the change that we are looking for.
Velocity is the perfect word. Gradual isolation is one thing. But dropping an entire long-standing friend group overnight and exclusively hanging out with a completely new crowd, that is a sudden pivot.
Right, or exhibiting extreme uncharacteristic depression or violent aggressive outbursts.
Exactly. Catching them in persistent out-of-character lies, finding things hidden in their room, or seeing them crash and sleep for 20-plus hours at a time.
Those are not standard factory settings for puberty.
Well, they are not. Those are red alerts indicating that the system has been shocked.
Something shocked the system, and because they don't have the emotional bandwidth to process a massive trauma, whether that's a deeply painful romantic breakup, extreme bullying, or exposure to heavy drugs, their behavior just becomes incredibly erratic.
The internal circuitry is just overloading.
Right. They lack the emotional regulation to process the shock smoothly, so it leaks out as extreme behavior.
Yes, it just spills over.
So, okay, we've observed the sudden drastic shift. The warning alarms are blaring. Our instinct as parents or even, as managers dealing with a struggling employee is to instantly intervene.
Of course, we want to fix it.
We want to sit them down, look them in the eye, and deliver a highly detailed, emotionally charged lecture about making good choices. But the sources are absolutely adamant that this instinct is highly destructive.
Yeah. The panel refers to this default parental reaction as the blank blackboard myth.
The blank blackboard myth.
Right. Parents often assume a child's mind is a blank blackboard. And if the child is making a mistake, the parent simply needs to take a piece of chalk and write the correct instructions on the board. Do this, don't do that. Here's how the world works.
We basically treat them like empty hard drives waiting for a file transfer.
That's exactly it.
But the reality is, teenagers are running incredibly complex operating systems.
You are listening to Ayeneh Podcast.
They're desperately trying to assert their own independence and forge an identity completely separate from their parents.
Yeah.
So when we sit them down for a monologue, we aren't actually teaching them, we're just giving them a wall to push against.
And psychologists call that concept psychological reactance. When a person feels their freedom or autonomy is being threatened, they will naturally rebel simply to reclaim their sense of control.
Even if the advice is objectively good.
Even if it's the best advice in the world. Lecturing a teenager usually just drives them further into secrecy.
Man, it really reminds me of a boss making an employee sit in a windowless room to watch a boring 3-hour corporate training video on synergy. Oh, the worst.
Right. Nobody learns anything. Everyone resents being there. And the information is discarded the second they leave the room.
So true.
What actually works in the corporate world, and apparently in parenting, is on-the-job shadowing. You have to model the behavior.
Fostering open communication and passing on values relies almost entirely on modeling. You literally cannot tell a teenager to do one thing while you routinely do the exact opposite.
Yeah, they see right through it.
They do. The experts shared a very stark example from the sources. Imagine a father who regularly retreats to the garage to smoke marijuana and drink alcohol to cope with a hard day at work.
Okay.
But then turns around and sternly lectures his 10-year-old child to never touch substances when they grow up.
I mean, the kid is just going to look at that dynamic and realize the words mean absolutely nothing. Because the actions are providing the actual rule book for how adults cope with stress.
Exactly. The hypocrisy completely destroys the parent's credibility.
And the sources offer another really profound example regarding relationship dynamics.
Yeah, this one is powerful. Let's say you want your teenage daughter to know how to stand up for herself, to set firm boundaries, and to never accept mistreatment in a future romantic relationship.
You cannot lecture her into having self-respect.
Right. You have to model it. You show her what self-respect looks like by not allowing your own spouse or anyone else to speak disrespectfully to you in your own home.
She internalizes the boundary by watching you enforce it in real time.
So we're tossing out the chalk and relying on modeling. But what do we actually do in the immediate moment when they're clearly hurting?
That's the hard part.
Right. When we see the sudden shift, we ask what's wrong, and we get the classic teenage shutdown, I don't know, or just leave me alone.
The advice here is simple in theory, but requires immense discipline. Hold the space.
Hold the space.
Yes. When they shut down, don't force the issue. Don't interrogate them. Just create a non-judgmental environment. You say, okay, I'm here when you're ready, and you just stay present.
I imagine the mechanism there relates to threat processing. Like if you start demanding answers, their brain registers you as an immediate threat and they just lock down further.
That is the physiological reality. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, is highly active. By backing off but remaining visibly available and calm, you actually allow their amygdala to settle.
You signal that you are not a threat.
Exactly. The panel notes that very often, if you maintain that patient silence, the teenager will return an hour or two later, completely on their own terms, to share a small piece of the story.
Wow.
But you have to let them control the throttle of the conversation.
That's such a good point. So, open communication helps dissect what happened yesterday. But the sources also emphasize that we have to prepare them for the imminent future, the genuinely risky situations they are absolutely going to face.
Yeah.
And this brings us to a major biological hurdle. We are asking them to navigate future risks using a brain that is fundamentally not fully assembled yet.
The biological hurdle is massive here. The adolescent brain, specifically the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for logic, complex reasoning, and impulse control, is literally the last part of the brain to fully develop.
It's just not done cooking.
No, it's not. In adults, the neural pathways in this area are coded in a fatty substance called myelin, which speeds up processing. Teenagers literally lack that insulation. They cannot simulate long-term consequences efficiently.
So they genuinely don't have the hardware installed to look at a party with alcohol and reckless driving and simulate the worst-case scenario.
Right.
Their foresight might only extend to, like, what they're wearing that Friday night. They just feel invincible.
Because their brains rely more heavily on the emotion-driven centers rather than the logic-driven prefrontal cortex, they just don't perceive the danger in the same way you do as an adult.
So if they can't see the danger, and a parent just resorts to blind restrictions saying, you are grounded, you are absolutely not going to that party, what actually happens?
Yeah. Well, you don't eliminate the risk. You just remove yourself as their safety net.
Wow. That's scary.
It is. They still crave the social experience, and they still don't perceive the risk, so they just view the parent as an obstacle to bypass.
So they'll just lie.
Yes. They will still attend the party, but they'll do it in secret, which dramatically increases the danger because now they're entirely on their own.
It's like you don't lock the doors of a building so people can't get inside, thinking you're keeping them safe from potential fires.
Right.
All you do is trap the people already inside with absolutely no way out. What you actually need to do is run a fire drill.
Exactly.
You teach them exactly where the exits are, what the alarms sound like, and how to use the fire escapes when the smoke actually starts pouring in.
The experts strongly recommend running what-if scenarios instead of issuing heavy restrictions. You sit down in a calm, emotionally neutral moment and ask, if you go to this party and someone hands you a drink you didn't pour or offers you something you don't recognize, what exactly are the words you're going to say?
You literally hand them a script.
Yeah.
You make them articulate the exit strategy before their logic center is completely overwhelmed by the stress and peer pressure of the actual moment.
You also ask, if the person who is supposed to drive you home gets drunk, what is your step-by-step plan? You basically force them to visualize the danger and preload the response.
And the crucial component of that fire drill has to be their ability to call for help without fear.
Yes, this is huge.
It's a really tough pill to swallow, realizing that our own parental anger might actually be a bigger threat to their safety than the bad situations they find themselves in.
It is the most vital rule of the fire drill. They must know explicitly that they can call you at 2 a.m. to execute a safe exit strategy without facing an immediate screaming punishment in the car ride home.
Right.
If they fear your reaction more than they fear the drunk driver, they will get in the car with the drunk driver.
They will choose the danger over the lecture every single time.
Every time.
That is a really heavy reality to sit with. But looking at the sources, I want to highlight something really profound about these fire drills. Teaching a teenager to navigate pushy friends or toxic peer pressure doesn't just solve a high school drama problem.
No, it translates directly to adulthood.
Right.
Teaching a teenager how to hold a boundary, how to say no, and how to gracefully exit a dangerous or toxic situation is exactly how you train them to deal with difficult coworkers, overbearing managers, or complex corporate environments tomorrow.
You're installing the foundational software they'll use to protect themselves for the rest of their lives.
Exactly. The skills they use to navigate a messy Saturday night party at 16 are the exact same mechanisms they will use to navigate a hostile boardroom at 36.
The stakes change, but the psychological mechanics remain totally identical.
And that is the core value of the walled garden transitioning to the public park. You are giving them the tools to survive in any environment.
We have covered some really vital territory today, so let's do a quick recap.
Let's do it.
We started by recognizing the massive shift in influence when school starts, how 2/3 of their world becomes the public park of peers, and how they fundamentally need that exposure to build a scale for healthy relationships.
Right.
To protect them, we have to put on the lab coat and become parenting scientists, looking for sudden, high-velocity behavioral pivots rather than normal biological changes.
The velocity is key.
Yeah. And we realize we have to toss out the blank blackboard myth because lecturing only triggers rebellion. Instead, we have to model the behavior and just, hold a calm space when they shut down.
Let the amygdala settle.
Exactly. And finally, knowing their frontal cortex can't process long-term risk, we have to stop using blind restrictions and start running fire drills, arming them with scripts and safe exit strategies.
It's a fundamental shift from trying to control their environment to trying to equip their minds.
Yeah.
And again, whether you're raising a teenager, mentoring a new hire, or navigating adult friendships, observation, modeling, and scenario planning are universal tools for influence and connection.
It really changes how you approach the whole concept of guidance.
It really does. And, looking at all this focus on letting them navigate the public park to build that internal scale, I want to leave everyone with a final thought that builds on these sources.
Okay, lay it on us.
We live in an era where technology allows us to extend our control further than ever before. We have these digital walled gardens, family tracking apps, GPS monitors in their pockets, read receipts on their messages.
Oh yeah, constant surveillance.
Right. We spend so much energy trying to construct a perfectly monitored, padded world. But if the ultimate goal is to help them build an internal compass, we have to ask ourselves, by constantly acting as their external GPS, are we artificially delaying the development of the very survival skills they need most?
Wow. Are we building a compass or are we just building a digital page?
Exactly.
Because eventually the front door is going to open permanently. When they step out into the world, you won't be able to control the weather. But if you've done the work, you can be absolutely sure you taught them how to build a boat.
Beautifully said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you next time.